Morning and welcome to Ghana Short. As you can see, I have with me John Helmer once again back on the show and Brig Arun Sahgal. And a very good morning to both of you gentlemen. In fact, good morning in India and
Good
it's
morning
also
to
good
me
morning
too.
in Moscow. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. With this, look, let me set the stage. Trumpomania is gripping the world in different manners, right? And we had various hues of Trumpomania with India, and even Pakistan and Russia and China. It depends on who looks at Trump the way he wants to. But that's not the case we're going to talk of. We're going to talk of something which is likely to happen on August 15th. It is slated that Trump and President Putin they meet in Alaska on August 15th. And very recently, Steve Witkoff, the U.S. representative on Russia and Ukraine war, met Mr. Putin, and he set some stage so that both Trump and Putin can meet and come to some agreement or a framework from where to go ahead. Well, these talks are very important for India in the context we are, because our tariffs or the punitive tariffs of additional 25% will take effect sometime later, towards the end of the month. And the outcome of these talks will have an effect on that. And plus, the way forward for India and USA will come from whatever these talks happen, one way or the other. A lot of things are happening, and in fact, Russia has put up its virtual demand. I wouldn't say demand. They've reiterated their case, where they've indicated that they need Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, and a few other issues. So we're going to talk of all this. What are the likely talks and where it's going to head, and then what are the implications for India and for the world at large, and many other issues. So I'll request John. John, take the lead, please. And you have a very good understanding of what's happening between Moscow and Washington. So that will give us an idea as to what we need to do going ahead further. All yours.
Thank you, Ravi, and I'm very glad for your invitation to you both. Thank you for inviting me. Perhaps if I go from the general to the particular, it would be a way of giving your audience some sense of what we all share in common, Russians and Indians, in dealing with President Trump. Let me say at the outset that from a general strategic point of view, President Trump is the best enemy India and Russia ever had. Now, let me explain why I think that. In the first place, for an enemy, an imperial enemy, it's extremely beneficial to our side that he's extremely predictable. He is very predictable. Make America great again. MAGA means make the empire great again. He keeps saying that he not only rules America now, but rules the world. This is an imperial ambition, which is very understandable to our Indian audience and to the Russian audience. Even Trump's genocide, I say the genocide in which Trump is now fully complicit in the Gaza, is reminiscent to our Indian audience and to you, gentlemen, of Churchill's 1943 genocide in Bengal. In other words, even genocide as an instrument of imperial rule, of expansion, of racism, race hatred, and of war, even Trump shares that with the British Empire and with Churchill. Unlike Churchill, however, Trump has several cognitive and neurological disadvantages. He's seriously handicapped. Like Churchill, he lies his head off, but at the same time, he's handicapped by an incapability to think in a normal fashion. You can see it from the way he talks, and to the audience who want to follow exactly how he talks, the record is very visible. in the transcripts and tweets that you can read on rollcall.com. Everything that Trump says is not only repeated in slogan form, but is false in a way that shows you he doesn't understand a great deal of what he says, what a president is constitutionally required to decide, and puts in place a series of pictures. Trump can't read words in the normal fashion. He sees pictures, and you can watch him speak of pictures, not of words. He cannot and does not understand the terms to be negotiated on August the 15th in Alaska with President Putin, or until now, since they made their telephone call in February to discuss an end-of-war settlement with Ukraine. He doesn't understand the negotiating terms. He does not understand them. He does not negotiate terms. Instead, he performs two kinds of imperial rule. One is fraud. He bribes and covers up bribery for achieving his objectives. He believes you can, and he can achieve his objectives by buying the other sides, the enemy sides, the adversary sides, businesses. It's the first point. And second, he ultimately relies on force. And he believes that, and he said it many times over, you can hear him saying it even in the past 24 hours, the United States Army is the best in the world. The United States Army is capable of totally obliterating its adversaries. The United States Army and Air Force, of course, totally obliterated the Iranian nuclear deterrent in its recent raid, and so on. Total obliteration and capitulation are imperial objectives. They're Trump's objectives. That's the limit of his understanding and goals. Now, how does one negotiate with such an individual? And why has President Putin agreed to meet him in the Wolf's Lair in Alaska? Bearing in mind, gentlemen, as we've talked about before, the attempt was made to kill Putin, assassinate Putin, when firing occurred on his helicopter in a visit to the Kursk region not too many weeks ago. Second, the US was complicit and deeply involved, along with the British, in the drone attack the Ukrainians called Operation Spiderweb against the Russian bomber element of the nuclear triad. So why does Putin agree to go to Alaska to meet Trump? And why is there a meeting at all at this stage? Let me just remind you that less than 48 hours ago, President Putin said in the presence of the president of the UAE in Moscow that he thought meeting in the UAE would be a good place to meet. He said it explicitly to the press for that purpose. Several hours before, Foreign Minister Lavrov spoke to the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan, and they discussed Istanbul as a potential site for the two to meet. Now, those two locations indicate that from a Russian point of view, or at least indicate to me, and so I offer for you to interpret, indicate that the Russian interpretation leading up to this, the decision to meet prior to Vitkov showing up in Moscow, the decision to meet was acceptable in the same way that had been acceptable when Trump visited the UAE in May. Remember that in the 3 days of Trump's visit to the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and when just before he left UAE to fly home, he left a very large 6-hour gap in his official schedule. And that was intended in the event that President Putin came to Istanbul, to lead the Russian delegation with the Ukrainian delegation at that time. At that time also, Zelensky, the regime ruler in Kiev, was also aiming to be in Istanbul. And the American idea was to have a troika, a combination of the three, in Istanbul. President Putin at the time proposed to, and prior to Trump's visit to the UAE and Saudi Arabia, had proposed to meet with Trump in the UAE or Saudi Arabia without Zelensky. So we are going back in time and repeating from a Russian point of view what was already agreed in principle. What's the Russian principle here? There's no problem in principle for Putin to meet Trump. The problem arises if Trump has preconditions for the meeting and insists that the meeting generate the kind of peace agreement which he wants to insist on. At that time, weeks ago, and up until now, it looked like the Americans were insisting that Putin agreed to, the Russian side agreed to an immediate ceasefire. The Russians came back first in Istanbul with 33-point end of war settlement. And then when Foreign Minister Lavrov met with Secretary of State National Security Advisor Rubio in Kuala Lumpur, I believe it's about a month ago, but don't hold me to the exact days.
Yeah, that's okay.
July 15, 16. Thank you, Arun. Lavrov made let's say, a shortened version, a précis version of the 33 points. Rubio called that a new concept, a new idea. I'll take it back to Washington, said Rubio. On his way, Rubio already signaled he didn't think much of the shortened terms of settlement that Lavrov was offering. By the time he got back, Trump clearly indicated, and he continued to indicate over the last 4 weeks, that he was, quotes, disappointed in President Putin, and kept hammering the notion that the Russian side was failing to meet his demands. So it appeared that Trump was first believing that whatever the Russian side offered, was unacceptable. But I go back to my general point. He doesn't understand and doesn't care what the detailed terms are. Second, Trump wants to show force and believes that's effective. And third, he needs to grandstand. He needs to show he rules the world. He needs to act the imperial figure, the universal imperial figure. And he symbolizes this by these repeated efforts to nominate himself, have Pakistan nominate him, have Israel nominate him, have Norway nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he recently, in the last 12 hours I've seen, Trump put up a tweet showing himself wearing the Nobel Peace Prize medal around his neck. Now that Trump Nobel Peace Prize tweet has disappeared. I can't find it. I saw it 5 hours ago, can't find it now. Maybe someone managing him has thought the better of doing that. But he certainly told the Norwegian Prime Minister a month ago, when the Norwegian Prime Minister was at the White House, to arrange for the Norwegian Nobel Prize winning committee to give him the prize. The problem is, of course, that the Nobel Peace Prize candidature is sealed, finished for last year, in January of this year. And the Norwegians will have to fiddle the books to make Trump eligible. But it's not so important for the rest of us, except to see it as a symbol of what you correctly called, Ravi, Trumpomania. It's his mania, but it reflects an underlying strategy that Indian audience and the Russian audience and many in our American audience understand perfectly well. This is standard imperial practice. Now, let me go to your particular question then, why this meeting? In the first place, as I've said, Russia doesn't have, in principle, any problem with Putin meeting Trump, first. Second, so that on the American side, the concession has been made, there'll be no Zelensky. That's important. No Zelensky, no troika as was intended for Istanbul. Second, there's another major US concession. There's no ceasefire. There's no announcement of a ceasefire to which President Putin must agree in order to have the meeting. That's a major concession. I'll explain why Trump thinks that's not a concession in a minute. So the third concession is made on the Russian side. Instead of either a safe haven like Abu Dhabi or Istanbul, Putin has agreed to Alaska. That's a change in the last 48 hours. It's Putin's acceptance that he's willing to hazard his own security on American territory. Of course, it was once Russian territory, so it's quite a symbol. It's quite a symbol. Now, whether President Putin has on his plane a complete kitchen, a complete supply of food, and every form of poison detection known to man remains to be seen. But it's a significant concession from a man whom the Americans, the Ukrainians, and the British have all tried to kill, for the president of Russia to visit the United States. But if you look at it from a Russian and third world and global point of view, it looks like the president of the United States is now welcoming his enemy on his own territory. That beats Hitler meeting Chamberlain well, Chamberlain went to Munich, didn't he? So it's something comparable. However, Putin is no Chamberlain. Russia is winning this war already. It has demonstrated the military capability to destroy and overwhelm and defeat any US weapon or European weapon on the battlefield. But you know more about that, Ravi, than I do. So the concessions are so significant here as to make what will happen performative. And that's the Russian intention. Where then can Russia negotiate an end of war settlement, if not on US territory, in the presence of the man who keeps saying he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize? So how will it work? All right, we just saw how it worked. If you look at Trump's performative ceremony of peacemaking between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the last 24 hours. Yes. Immense ceremony and a very little substance. Now, for those, we can talk about it in a minute. For those who aren't familiar with Azerbaijan, it's ruled by an extremely weak ruler who inherited rule, Ilham Aliyev, from his father, who was a powerful and intellectually dominant man, none of whose characteristics his son has inherited. Aliyev is weak in Azerbaijan, but his rule is supported by strong individuals. Nikol Pashinyan, the Armenian prime minister, is also weak and is hoping for an American support to make up for his domestic weakness and his regional weakness. They have reached a declaration. That's not a treaty. You look at the small print of what's just been announced. You look at the small print of what was just signed for the cameras a few hours ago. First of all, Armenians speak Armenian. Azeris speak Azerbaijan language, Azeri language. The treaty is not a treaty. The declaration is in the English language. It's a 3-paragraph commitment that amounts to, which had been initialed by the foreign ministers prior. That's to say, it's a memorandum of understanding promising to go on negotiating to reach particular agreements between the two countries. In addition, there are bilateral agreements in which Armenia sells itself to the United States, especially the important Zangezur corridor in the south that connects Azerbaijan mainland, Nakhchivan, its territory, which requires crossing Armenia to reach. But those bilateral agreements have not been released yet and may not exist. Since when, gentlemen, does an MOU amount to an IOU? You can take an IOU to the bank, but you can't take this MOU to the bank. It's a declaration of intention with great stakes and disagreements, and powerful regional actors, Turkey, Iran, Russia, are still to weigh in on this issue. It's a performative declaration in which Trump repeatedly described himself as the peacemaker. And you remember that he, at that session and every previous session, he endlessly repeats that he made peace between Pakistan and India. In addition, he's made peace between Congo and Rwanda. In addition, he's about to impose peace on Hamas in Palestine. This is about what I expect and what our audience can expect to happen in Alaska. And President Putin sees a personal gain in that, making him the peacemaker for the entire alliance. Now, to get finally quickly to the other related points, especially the India point. When Stephen Witkoff arrived in Moscow, he was met at his airplane by Kirill Dmitriev. Kirill Dmitriev runs a Russian sovereign investment fund called a Russia Direct Investment Fund. Kirill Dmitriev was educated in the United States. He is a money man. He is the money man, call it the bag man, for the Russian business constituency. He welcomed Witkoff off the plane. What's Witkoff? He's a real estate speculator, an investor. He is Trump's bagman. The two bagmen get in the car and drive into town. They walk around the park outside the Kremlin until the hour appointed for the meeting. There is no foreign minister at that meeting. Sergei Lavrov was at the meetings with Witkoff in the past. He wasn't there this time round. That meant they weren't talking about terms. They were talking about incentives on both sides. The two bagmen have come up with a formula for inducing the business constituencies on the Russian side and the business constituencies on the American side to press the boss to see the economic and business and commercial advantages in a peace which must immediately result in some relief for the Russian side of sanctions. That would also mean at least postponement for the secondary sanctions proposed by Trump to be applied to China and India and hit the oil trade. Now, what sort of an individual is Witkoff? I've not been in real estate, so I can't tell you how trustworthy he is in that line of business. However, the Palestinians can tell you his word is worthless in the negotiations with Hamas, between Israel and Hamas. He represented only the Israeli side and broke particular commitments to Hamas, which they believed him to be putting honestly as an honest mediator. Ask the Iranians what they think of Witkoff. The answer is Witkoff promised that so long as the negotiations were reasonable and continuing, there would be no attack on Iran. That proved worthless. Israel attacked and the Americans attacked, and they collaborated in the attack on Iran. If Witkoff is that untrustworthy, what does Trump consider him to be? Well, Trump just said in the Aliyev-Pashinyan summit meeting, Trump just called him, I call him my Henry Kissinger who doesn't leak. Well, I don't have a particularly high opinion of Henry Kissinger, and Kissinger never leaked. Kissinger always misled the press. That was what he did. But Kissinger had a skill politically, diplomatically, Witkoff has only one function. It's to convey money between sides. And my understanding, you gentlemen can confirm or not confirm, is that Witkoff and Witkoff's family were the go-betweens for Pakistan to pay what they believed was necessary to achieve the lunch that President Trump had, the unique lunch with Field Marshal Asim Munir, and for the beginning of the reorientation of Pakistan back to its old strategic and military alliance with the United States. That's Witkoff for you. Now, what can 3 hours of Witkoff, Putin, Dmitriev in the room, and Putin's foreign affairs assistant Yuri Ushakov agree to? Well, I can't tell you I know. What I can tell you is that Ushakov subsequently said in a readout that has been published on the Kremlin website that, like Trump, who followed the Witkoff meeting with a telephone call that had Zelensky, the Director General of NATO, and the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, and the Prime Minister of England, Keir Starmer. That group that left out France, for example, that's significant. That meeting reassured them all of what Witkoff and Putin had agreed, which means they'd agreed not to, neither side had given any way on the European 22-point terms that they had submitted in Istanbul, and the Russian side hadn't agreed either. At the same time, Yuri Ushakov said Russia has likewise communicated with its friends and partners, and that means Prime Minister Modi, and it means President Xi first of all. First of all, BRICS isn't the large group, it's the Troika, Russia, India, China. And the issue of what President Putin told Prime Minister Modi is of great importance, and I'd like to hear what you think was said. What I've been told by my sources is that President Putin assured Prime Minister Modi that there would be no backing off or backing down or retreating on the Russian side, and the Russian side supported no backing down, no retreat, no running away by the Indian side on the attempt to destroy Indian sovereignty in making its own economic policy decisions and oil trade. So I think I've said enough for openness, and I've got a very important question for you later. So why don't you take a shot at me, Rabin?
Yeah, let's first, I'd like Brigadier Sahgal, sir. So we've heard, John's way of putting things across, and he's right. I'd like your views on these issues, because this Putin-Trump meet is going to be important for us, and it's got many connotations. I'll not go into it. I'd like you to put it out. Please go on, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll just turn on the light. I'm retreating into darkness here. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what I can make out from the discourse given by John is essentially there are three balls in play. There is an American exceptionalism. There is a Putin who's trying to play the game with America. And third is we are the offside of this whole issue in terms who's caught up in between this whole game of one-upmanship between the two. So the fundamental point that I have is, if there is I agree with you, there is going to be no ceasefire per se coming up or any kind of a detailed negotiations on the terms of ceasefire, etc. It might just turn around to be another MOU like the Azerbaijan and Armenia kind of a scenario, what could be the terms of those MOU, and how much will those that satisfy the United States? Issue one. Issue two is that in this game, you already rightly said that there has been no consideration of the European 22 demands. The Europeans continue to be on the sideline. The game is between these two, and it is being played with a very tight time frame, particularly from the Trump side, to be able to get something concrete going on the Ukraine war. So the issue that comes about is this: is Putin capable of delivering, and what is the least that Putin can deliver to Trump? Because Putin cannot allow Trump to become the sovereign leader of the world and who can push around everybody on this earth. It cannot happen that way. Neither can Putin continue to have this kind of a grandstanding vis-a-vis Trump without getting some kind of a negotiation space. And the negotiation space is getting closer and closer as far as the Americans are concerned, because I can sense Mr. Trump is getting jittery right now because he wants some kind of of, let's put it this way, a positiveness in this issue. The third issue is is how are the Europeans placed? So what we are basically looking at are three elements. The America wants victory for American reasons. You rightly said, for American hegemony, the way he wants to be the global overlord. The Europeans are caught up because they cannot afford a Russian victory, or a situation in Russia comes out trumps, or comes out in terms in which it has a territory and it has a workable agreement in which it continues to have leads to regime change in Ukraine, etc., or comes out on a side that it has gained, seen as the Russian has been able to gain a huge amount of strategic advantage. That would to the Europeans basically means is that they are living in a continent in which Russian power and influence remains undefeated and remains credible. Now, this is the issue that's come about. Now, the problem from our perspective is this: if there is a downside of this, we'll get the 25% hit. There is no doubt about it. But if there is not, even there is some kind of a quasi agreement, will we get that hit? We can take that into account. We can note that. But the question basically is, how does global power equations play out from here on? Because at some stage, the Chinese would have to be factored into it. And the way Mr. Putin has been talking to Mr. Xi Jinping, he spoke to him yesterday, and the way he has been, you rightly said, Mr. Xi was number one, and then he is been in touch with him. So under the circumstances, how is this game going? What is your understanding of the end game that we are trying to enter into? But the short question is this: what is your understanding of the end game? Because you understand this game much more than any of us do, at least more than I do.
Well, that's
Yeah, can
I
I?
don't believe I don't believe I do, but I've got a big question for you two, because to understand the end game, we have to understand what the middle game is that the Americans are playing. Now,
Okay.
a correspondent of mine who's, let's say, on the US side and has an intelligence background, has sent me a message saying he is convinced that the Pahalgam attacks were inspired by the Americans. Inspired by the Americans for Pakistan to trigger and provoke what the American strategists believe would be increased direct conflict between China and India. I'd like to know whether you think that's preposterous or correct. if you believe it to be correct, then we're looking at underneath Trump's mania, as Ravi's correctly described it, are some very nasty calculations, which those of us on the target end of US imperial strategy have to take into account, and that would help us figure out the end game for the Indian side, the Russian side, and for the Chinese side. Do you believe the US was complicit in and provoked and helped plan the Pakistani attack?
Shankar, would you like to go ahead
No,
first?
I don't think this could have happened, to be very honest. The chance, you see, the Pahalgam attack, the way it panned out, and where it panned out, and how it panned out, and uh, couldn't have been instigated by anyone else except Pakistan. And the reason is this: it's not that the attack which mattered, but the outflow of that attack which mattered. If the outflow of the attack was, I mean, the way this is the way Pakistanis think. What can India do after that? I do this attack. What can I do? What will I get after that? The Pakistani thought process was that India will respond in the same linear manner in which it has so far has responded, right from Kargil, Pulwama, Uri, earlier attacks, and some small action. All India can do at the best is do some small action along the line of control or hit the IP sector a bit, and we'll counter it with our nuclear weapons and our strategic thinking and all that. But unfortunately, we didn't play by their playbook. You see, the whole playbook changed because we hit them where they didn't expect. So in the event, I don't think, in my own view, I don't think even China expected what happened. I don't think even Pakistan expected what happened. I don't think even USA expected what happened. The way we reacted. In the Pakistan India context, doing anything across the international border into heartland Pakistan has always been a no-go so far. That is a huge unpredictable, which I don't think they were prepared to take it on. I don't think Pakistan visualized that they'll do it. Maybe by the time actual thing happened, they were very clear something will come there. But I don't know whether America could have triggered this with the hope that what happened did happen. So that's my take on this. Sahgal sir, your view. Then
Okay. Can I just see?
Yeah,
there are three things which are important. First issue is that China has played a role in support of Pakistan in this conflict. And that role which the Chinese have played has been a huge plus point for the Pakistanis in the initial phases of the war. Subsequently, of course, things changed to our advantage in a huge way. The second issue is the endearing of the Pakistani military establishment under the pretext of bitcoins, under the pretext of Asim Munir, under the pretext of operations going on in Iran between the Israelis and this thing, and the subsequent intervention by the United States, they opened up a space for the Americans to enter back into Pakistan.
Pakistan.
The bribe, I'm told, a huge amount of money was exchanged hands between the American interlocutors and the Pakistani establishment, the deep state, to pay for that lunch, organization of that lunch that took place. It was an orchestrated event done by there. And along with that, of course, is this thing is that Pakistan has emerged as a sort of a haven for this entire getting the Bitcoin industry. They got that famous
Minerals.
minerals is
Cryptos.
a small
Cryptos.
crypto industry, crypto this thing, and that guy who handled this thing, he's I think a Hong Kong fellow, whatever, who's
Yes.
American. So the issue basically is this: is that deep state in the United States felt that having, they believe, and the Pakistanis concur with them, is having organized a ceasefire was an opportunity to get Pakistan back and get a foothold back into Pakistan, and through that foothold, try and manipulate the military establishment who was going to seen, at least at the younger level. There's a difference between the senior level and the younger level. The younger level was going towards the Chinese side. They're pretty happy with the Chinese equipment, they were training, etc., etc. But the younger, elder levels who have a huge amount of investments and assets in the West, particularly in England and Russia, were keen to recalibrate their relationship with the United States. So this has provided them with an opportunity for host of reasons. Afghanistan is one issue, Iran is another issue, China is another issue. But here, unfortunately, I do not think that the Americans have full control. The ball is in play. The ball
Play.
is in play, in as much as that the Chinese are watching and looking at what the Pakistanis are up to. Please understand the inside there might be an American deep state, but there's equally strong Chinese deep state, and that is on the political and economic side. And those guys are all also involved in this whole issue of investments under the BRI, investment under the SIPA, investments in Guada, purely because, and then this whole thing gets linked to what is happening in the Indo-Pacific, where China is making a huge amount of progress and the Americans are looking lethargic and uncoordinated in the Indo-Pacific. So if you look at it from that perspective, the mid game over here is this: is as usual, Pakistan has allowed himself to become a rentier or a tool to be utilized by the Americans for a short term gain, and in which they will and might end up once again with the kind of problems that they had in the past when they supported the Mujahideen, when they supported George Bush in Afghanistan, etc. The same problem they might end up with. But that's the game they are playing. We are not interested in that. But what
We're
we
not
are,
interested in that. I'd like to add. You see, in this whole game, China is the loser so far in this option war, because they've ceded space somewhere during the what we did with Pakistan. Pakistan was probably convinced that by going with China militarily, they would always end up losing. And the only antidote to what India could do to them is to go back to America. And that somehow get America back into the thing. And then they could also balance themselves out with China. So I think the Pakistani game is very clear to us. On that, let's not have any doubt. And the fact that the Chinese are now smarting, because you read the Mandarin news in China, they're smarting about what's happening with America and Pakistan. And also don't miss the fact that very recently, the Central Army CENTCOM commander Kurila was in Pakistan, and he chaired a meeting of all the Central Asian military chiefs. So the USA is making an entry into Central Asia, right? And that is detrimental to China. After all, China is holding this
Yes.
SCO this month end that works cross purposes, and Pakistan is the conduit for all this. So
Well,
I
it's
think there's more than
detrimental to the three of us. It's detrimental to India, it's detrimental to China, and it's detrimental
China,
to Russia. So
Russia.
it's
Yes,
not the
there
first
is.
time. It wouldn't be the first time that an American brain has gotten a cause confused with an effect. In other
yes,
words,
Yes,
we can all make that mistake. The mistake that let's call it those under Trump, let's call them the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, Elbridge Colby, and the other planners of war sequencing, They don't make such foolish mistakes. But
Yeah,
as you've said, Ravi, they can exploit the result for their advantage. And if they
yeah.
propose to sell to Pakistan, the idea that Pakistan will be the platform for the U.S. war against the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, if Pakistan is convinced it can be the Ukraine for the Central Asian front that the US wishes to fight, but not suffer the Ukrainian disadvantage, then we go back to Arun's question: what's the end game? Since Russia,
Yeah,
China, and India are all targeted by these developments. I would suppose the first principle of defining the end game is the three of us better fight together, not not apart.
I'm not so sure about it. Let me also put across. You see, what's happened between USA, Pakistan, and China is something we have to count. Don't count that out. We go back in history. What happened in 71, 72? Kissinger came to Pakistan, feigned sickness overnight. Next day he was with Mao, spoke to Mao, came back. In 72, Nixon went back to Mao, and there was this great partnership which bloomed between USA and China. This is history. Is this history being repeated today in a reverse manner? Is a question which we have to ask, and I'll tell you why. You see that whatever happened during this whole story, China, USA has made a comeback in. Kurila gets to pally with chummy with this fellow, this field marshal, calls him to Florida. He spends 4 days in Florida in CENTCOM headquarters. It's on the fifth day he goes for lunch. Whatever transpires in that lunch with Trump transpires, he comes back. And soon after, he goes to he goes to China. He goes to China, speaks whatever he has to speak with China. He comes back. When he comes back, Kurila is in Pakistan, and he's got all these SCO guys, military chiefs, and they're discussing things. And he's given a medal. And today, as we speak, this Asim Munir is back in USA. So this back and forth of Asim Munir, and the ostensible reason why he has gone there is to ensure that he can give a farewell to his friend Kurila. And if you look at the background of Kurila and Asim Munir, they've never met each other before this. They've never served together. They've never had great equations. And another thing about Asim Munir is that he is not educated in America or Western societies or Western thing or China, like many Pakistani generals. So he's got a more of a Middle East leaning and all that, and he's become pally overnight with Kurila. So if you think this is going to be something great friendship between Russia, China, and India, which we are taking off with, against USA, I think we might not be right. And I think there's a dynamic developing between China and USA through Pakistan. And that is the reason why this 90-day extension has been given to China to come to a conclusion. And that is going to be quite interminable. So I think we need to look at it. That's right. What's the end game? The end game in this is pretty important, and how it's going to pan out. Right. I do agree. President Putin has spoken to Xi, and that's the first priority. They have spoken, and whatever is spoken has come out. I don't put it past China to play a double game. And they're playing a double game. And already the feelers which are coming to India to go to their side are huge. The candy which is being offered is huge. So I think we need to have a relook at this whole story. Brigadier Arun Sahgal, sir, your views on what I've said.
Okay,
And
so
then I'll take.
let me tell you is that Albert Colby is actually a friend of mine.
Okay.
So what he is been lamenting in last, you see what Haxat's remarks at the IIS conference was, and he basically is lamenting upon the fact that once yet again American foreign policy establishment is digressing from Indo-Pacific and spending their energies into Middle East and other places. And this is going to be counterproductive to their assessment. They are perceiving that this is providing a free hand. The way the AUKUS is being treated, the way it is becoming a null and void issue, the way the Quad is collapsing more or less, etc., and where there is a difference of opinion with the Koreans and the Americans, this whole narrative is collapsing. So, why is United States picking up South Asia as a new arena of entrenchment? That is a big question. Frankly, I have not put my hands on this so far. But I can see two things in this. Is that Pakistan may be attached to two things. One is Iran, and second is Afghanistan. And the fact is that Afghanistan is now getting diplomatic acceptance from both these people. There is also this whole issue of ISIS-K becoming more, let's say, active. The Western concerns are it could lead to Iranian reconsolidation, plus ISK, etc., could lead to a revival of terrorism in the West. That's something which they are. I'm sorry to say the Americans plan too much and for too long, and then they get confused what's happened did they do in the past. So they might think they have an institutional memory, but in my view, they lose sight of the institutional memory. The as far as the Chinese are concerned, they have already, if you notice, they have started pushing the pedal on the Taiwanese, and it is clear to every Asian power that if push comes to shove, United States is not going to be a great intervener that it has been promising to everybody in town. To that extent, each one of the players in the East Asia will play their own game depending on their own interests. They are not going to play the American game. Having said that, the Chinese are now also making inroads into the South Asia, as well as with S-400s and all kinds of assistance being given to Iran to build up its defenses. They are also moving into the Persian Gulf. So if you look at it from that perspective, what America is doing in these kind of little games they are playing in the Central Asia is too little, too late kind of a story. So, to my extent, I do not understand what the Americans are up to. For reasons are they do not have the heft. American power is long range strike capability, which does not bring about regime changes. We have seen that happening. You can bring in 12 B-12 bombers and bomb the hell out of the Iranian nuclear sites, but enriched uranium continues to be somewhere else stored, and B, it means little difference. So the world is now, we have to calibrate, at least from my perspective, I need to calibrate what does all this power and influence of the United States means to the world. And I am coming to a conclusion is that Trump has realized the military power is passé. It is economic power and the trade power that's going to function in his favor. And he also realized that it has got a shelf life. And if that shelf life, he wants to do maximum that he can for his own country. And in this bargain, he's going to play a double game. At one level, he's trying to undermine China or have a reasonable detente with China. On the other hand, he realizes his own exposures, critical minerals, technology, etc. They cannot do without Chinese, because the latest Pentagon report indicates that one or two Chinese companies are involved in practically every major military system which the Americans are developing. So we are looking at a very, very convoluted world system over here. And I, for one, cannot put my hands on it. And I, for one, even if I had to advise my prime minister on anything, I would not know what to say.
Well, but may
Okay.
I ask you? Let me
Yeah.
ask you a negative question, with your permission, Ravi. Let me ask you
Please.
both. Since we all agree, in a sense, on the amount of double gaming that we have to deal with, but that's normal politics. So let's suppose we're having to repeat what our lifetime careers were about. We've got to advise the boss, A, on what to expect, and B, we have to look at the negative scenarios and weigh them in terms of our national interests. So if you don't mind me asking you, Arun, first, suppose you're advising the Indian Prime Minister, what do you least want to see President Putin do or agree to do or appear to agree to do in Alaska with Trump? What is the worst up to the best outcomes from an Indian point of view that you'd be advising the Prime Ministry in Delhi?
From my perspective, the best outcome would be some kind of MOU being signed in Alaska, which brings in some kind of a relief. Without, I do not, for the love of God, believe that Putin is going to compromise the United States at all. So that would sort of initiate the process of moving forward in some sense to bring about, and which from Indian perspective may create a situation where the guy takes his foot off the pedal of, from our perspective, of the 25%
Second,
new
secondary
sanctions,
tariff penalty.
secondary tariffs that
Secondary
he's
sanctions.
secondary sanctions that is imposed on. To me, that perhaps would be the. I do not believe anything more than the MOU. Very rightly put. I really admire what you said. The MOU is the only way out. At least some basic understanding to move forward. And I think subsequently, if he gets Zelensky in and etc. So the entire pivot to the global disorder that we are trying to look at is basically ensconced in this meeting on the 15th of August.
15th. And on 15th, if you can get a framework, I mean, that Azerbaijan and Armenia is only a framework agreement.
Yeah, only
And
MOU
yeah,
framework.
only a framework agreement. And it's a framework, MOU framework, whatever you call it. And
Congo and
both
Rwanda is a framework. They're all frameworks. They're all MOUs. They're not IOUs. They're MOUs.
yeah, they're a framework. And both these people have proposed for Trump to get a Nobel Prize. So if something comes like this, another framework comes out or a MOU comes out, look, we will do something later on, and Trump gets that character of a Nobel Prize, then he will start stepping back. Otherwise, he won't. And neither will he step back on Russia, nor will he step back on India. On China, he's already got his conduit going through Pakistan. Let's be very clear about it. China and USA are talking officially through dialogue and unofficially through Pakistan. I mean, if you think that they're not talking, then we are out of the equation. So whatever President Putin is talking, I'm sure he'll be aware of this moment which is happening. So I think it depends on how much Mr. Putin can give to Trump or give to Trump's ego without losing anything is the crux of what's going to happen on 15th.
Well, what would be the worst outcome from Prime Minister Modi's point of view?
From our way of thinking, the worst outcome is there's no agreement, nothing, and in which case we go alone, right? In which case Russia and India have to really sit and think together. As simple as that.
And we live with that.
We'll live with that. We'll live with that. It's not as if we won't live with it. We will live with it. But in which case, Russia and India have to think very hard together. And let me also put it, if I'm sure Russia knows this, if Russia has to start banking on China to do to help bail it out, I think we are on the wrong boat. For us, there's no way we can think of China. We can't think of China beyond a point. And that's the way this game is going to be played, because the joker in this entire pack is Pakistan. It's a nuisance, but it is a big nuisance.
See, we have a very serious problem. May I? May I?
Yeah,
Okay.
please, sir.
We have a serious problem. The serious problem is uh, we have invested a lot in the last 20, 25 years in trying to build up a relationship with the West.
Please, West.
India conceptually, and India, by and large, from his perceptional point of view, is more comfortable with the West than with the East. They, although we have a lot of historical and other relationship with the East, but the fact that we were ruled by the Brits, our intellectual mindset is naturally inclined to the West. So the leadership, the bureaucracy in India is naturally inclined towards that, and so they, to that extent, they will do everything under the sun to get some kind of deal which they can live with, as long as the political price is payable. Now the question comes is, if that deal does not come through and the political price is payable, how do they equate with Russia and China? Now, this is a dilemma as far as I'm concerned. From my perspective, India has to bring in at some stage the Chinese markets, the Chinese technologies, the Chinese investments into its fray, because we cannot, and the West, and when I say West, if we think we're going to get a respite from EU, we are living in
You're not going to do anywhere. Go
no.
anywhere.
So whether, like Deng Xiaoping said, bide your time.
Mhm.
So we have to bide our time. And in my view, slightly digressing from others, in my view, is that even if we have to make some kind of adjustment with the Chinese, with our eyes open, we should not shy away from making those adjustments with the Chinese. Because
Yeah.
please remember, in the 75 years of the border dispute that we have had, it has remained on the borders. It has not gone beyond borders. Vis-a-vis Pakistan, for the 75 years that we have had, we have fought 4 or 5 wars, and bloody wars. Okay, people dying, people getting killed. So the issue basically is this: is we have to start looking at our neighborhood a little more constructively rather than depending too much on the West. West is important for technology, West is the same, but on terms where even when we are willing to accept a certain degree of their uh, let's say idiosyncrasies on trade, etc., it cannot be that they harm us in a fashion that we are totally subjugated. We cannot be subjugated. So to that extent, I think India would need to realign its thinking from black and white and try to reach the gray zone, which allows it a little more space for maneuver.
Can I
Yeah,
just add a
yeah, please.
couple of points here? I agree with all you said, Arun. It's just that I no longer understand what we understand to be the West. I mean, if you don't mind, all three of us here are of the age, they were all colonial boys. We were
Yes.
all educated in a British system. But as colonial boys, you fought for your independence of the British, and it's taken a long time for you to be able to rewrite your history so it's not a British history. Me, I descend from Russians, but I have as a colonial boy, I grew up thinking that the job for the independence and national identity that I shared meant I had to learn to fight the empire. I had to learn to unlearn imperial culture. I had to, and for that, from my point of view, I went to the United States to unlearn my Britishness, unlearn it. Well, look what I learned. Here I am in Russia, understanding that we now have another imperial battlefield. For the time being, it's on in the Ukraine, but it's moving, just as we've all agreed, to the South Caucasus, to Balochistan, between Pakistan and Iran, and so forth and so on, and to the Indo-Pacific area. And I'm grateful to you both for your reading of your history, because it has to inform our common strategy. We either hang together or we hang separately. And this is what colonial boys understand when we are forced by the empire to either capitulate or find our independence and sovereignty. Now, capitulation, total obliteration are the two bywords that Trump uses. Underneath him, let's call it the deep state, but we're getting a very clear idea of who in particular they are, persuaded us that they would fight a sequencing of wars, applying US power in sequence so that it wasn't overwhelmed on one front. They could concentrate essentially, as the Pentagon has said, on the main enemy, China. Well, actually, it's now turning out that they're fighting several wars all at once. The Eastern Front, they're the Ukraine front, and so on. But they are finding ways of making the Europeans pay, particularly the Chancellor of Germany pay to fight the Ukraine war, and so forth. But I don't see this as a clever way of making others pay for an imperial war. The Romans taught us how to do that a couple of thousand years ago. So from my point of view, what we share is, as Arun said, a common relearning without declaring war that we can't win in the short run. Redefine what we can win in the medium and longer term, and buy the time, not just bide the time, until we get to the end game, or at least we get to the middle game, so we can see how much freer and sovereign we are. Well, from a Russian point of view, the big apprehension, and I say it from my family, from everyone I know, there is a very big apprehension always that the desire to be loved by the United States, to be patronized by the United States, to join the West, to be accepted by the West, it was on obvious and vulgar display by Mikhail Gorbachev. It was on obvious and vulgar display by Boris Yeltsin. I won't say that President Putin has made a vulgar display of it, but there are others in his entourage, and Kirill Dmitriev, the bagman I have referred to, shows it in the most vulgar fashion. Now, there is therefore a significant, deep apprehension on the Russian side that the blood and treasure that has been expended on the battlefield must not be sacrificed to a faulty belief that Russia can have its independence and an accommodation with anyone who seeks to make the American empire great again. That's impossible. On the other hand, it's very difficult for Russia and for all of us. You've said it about India. One waits to hear it from the Chinese. It's very difficult for major powers to understand, to fit their capacities to their ends, and to accept their limitations for the time being. So buying time and biding time, we need to share together.
On that, there's no doubt at all. There's no doubt at all that, look, in this entire game, if you see in the past 50, 60, 70 years, the two friends who have been steadfast most have been Russia and India. And, but at this point of time, the way both of us are stuck, we have to go through a lot of gray zone, thinking, and maybe bide our time to come to a brighter tomorrow. That's the way I look at it. At this point of time, we don't have direct answers. So that's how it is. We are entered a very uncertain period. Just the past 3 months, from April onwards, we've entered a completely uncertain period, and where I don't think even USA is clear what it's doing. I mean,
Yeah.
for wall, I don't think they're very clear. I don't know whether what they want also. I don't see that happening. I don't think they're politically right also, or they have a political clarity on what they're doing. And I go back to why I started this word called Trumpomania, because this man is holding a lot of people to ransom, including his own country. Right? That's the way I look at it. He seems to be besotted with the Nobel Prize. If you give him a Nobel Prize, what next is a bigger question, right? So there are a lot of issues, and we are going through this gray zone. We'll see how we get out of it, right? I think we've just extended ourselves in the nice talk. We at least clarified a lot of our ideas. So 1 minute for you to conclude, and then I'll follow it with John, and we'll conclude the show. Arun sir.
No, no, I totally agree with you. I think these are trying times for all of us, and I also agree with you. Even the United States does not understand what the end game is. He started to play. It's like we have a old mythology in which a young son of a leader entered a Chakravyuh. So you entered the ring, and you had no idea how to get out of it. So everybody has entered the ring, and nobody has any idea how do you get out of it. What are your strategy? Everybody is thinking on his feet. So we do not know how this is going to end. Certainly, you cannot get away by holding the world at ransom. And certainly, we will have to play our cards smartly. Certainly, we'll have to uh, interact together, understand each other, as also we also will have to, as far as India is concerned, I can say will continue to interact with the United States as well, because United States is not Trump. There are other people in the United States who have a much better idea. Like my good friend in America said, he said the most constructive partnership which has been built over years of hard work has been thrown into the garbage dump. So that's the feeling some of them have who have invested a lot. So I think it's hard work. All of us need to be intellectually engaged. And thank you, John, for your insights. Really remarkable insights. Thank you very much, sir. And of course to
Thank
Shankar for always bringing it together. And his insights are also remarkable. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, sir. John, your views, and then I'll
Well,
close the show.
in 1 minute, I think we all agree, and so I'm not going to I'm not going to wrap up by disagreeing. On the other hand, I think Arun has said it. It's not that the Americans are confused. It's just that different ones have different ideas, and they're ruled by a man who has actually conceptually or neurologically no capacity to have ideas at all. He has something different. Underneath that individual, one has to understand this is imperial strategy, and there are different ways of they think. There's the hard force way, the total obliteration way that Trump is fascinated by, and it enhances his ego. And the Nobel Peace Prize for him is a symbol for us of imperial force. On the other hand, there are many other ways. There is soft imperialism on the part of the Americans that used to be called soft power when a Harvard professor called it that. And a lot of Harvard professors and a Chicago professor remain addicted to soft imperialism, which means that American ideas should prevail, if even when American arms fail. Well, we have us, including many Americans, different ideas that have as their same object the neutralization of the US as an imperial force on the rest of the world. hegemony is one way of putting it. There are many ways of putting it. You don't have to read Lenin on imperialism to understand it. There are Indian, there are Chinese, there are colonial, even Australian expressions of this. Listen to our accents. We all speak in a different accented English. However, we all share the view, Americans with us, that the American imperial enterprise that Trump is heading does some favors for Russia. It has destroyed the oligarch constituency inside Russia in a way that President Putin was unable to do himself. It hasn't totally destroyed the oligarch constituency until it removes the governor of the central bank and individuals like Kirill Dmitriev, the bagman for the oligarchs in this particular game. However, this game's going to be longer than we've got, and it's got to be, but it's not as long as our countries have got and our sense of what's right for our people. So in my view, we are not unready. We are not divided. We are not going to hang separately. And I agree that an MOU, to be just practical about next week, an MOU that gives Trump what he thinks he wants and gives our people the sense that nobody is playing a double game between Russia, India, and China, but gives us time to prepare the bigger enterprise. That's what we have to have, and we mustn't hang separately on this.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks a lot, Sahgal, sir, for this wonderful discussion. Let's wait till 15th. Let's see what happens then, and then we'll take this whole thing forward.
We'll
Right?
dissect the MOU.
We'll dissect the MOU, whatever happens, because it concerns a lot of us.
Yes.
You know, the MOU per se might not have much value going forward, but it concerns a whole lot of us. It gives breathing space for many people. It gives a leeway for many people to take the whole case forward. So till then, we'll wait till August 15th, and after that, we'll discuss with this. Thanks a lot. Jai Hind, and
Thank you.
a very good morning to all of you.
Thank you.
Enjoy Moscow. Enjoy Chennai. I'm going to enjoy Delhi. I hope,
Thank you,
thank God
sir.
it stopped raining. God bless. Thank
Oh,
you.
great. Right, sir. Have a great day. So
Thank
I'll
you.
switch it off now. Right, sir? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, John. See you. I'll
Thank
put
you,
it out a
Victor.
little late.
Pardon?
I'll put it out a little late. This thing I'll not be able to edit it today. I'll put it out tomorrow, and I'll give you
Okay.
the link. I'll give you the link the moment I put it. I'll give you the link.
We're not Christians about this, are we? Sunday's fine.
Okay, Sunday is fine. Okay, first class. Okay, see you. Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.